all kinds of new political techniques. They're interested in tangible legislative results. That's what they're interested in. And it's gotten to an obnoxious and dangerous level. Dangerous for democracy. So for all of those 4 reasons, I submit that the United States Senate is no longer the greatest deliberative body on earth.
Thank you very much, Senator. Little wonder that Missouri is saddened by losing a great champion of their causes and a great leader in the Senate. I'd like to ask Senator Mattingly now, that since he's fresh from the campaign trail, and since Senator Eagleton has gone into Senate campaign financing, one of the real problems that we see facing the Senate is that so much time is consumed with both raising money and thanking people afterwards and following up, of course, with commitments that one has to make. This last election that we've just gone through is estimated to cost about $1 billion. We can see that about $356 million were spent by the candidates themselves. It's hard work, as all of them can attest, to constantly get out and campaign. But the last campaign was singular in that there were a lot of 30-second spots, there were a lot of quick negative judgments about people, and we missed the Eagleton days and the Strom-Thurmond days when people actually got out to rallies and when they got out and did handshaking and did personal encounters. Now it's all on television. It's very difficult. Other countries have taken a lead in solving this problem. For instance, Brazil, as we just noted, has said, okay, for our elections, we're going to set aside an hour a week for free public television. All of the networks, all of them giving over to nothing but political speeches and political campaigning. This seems to have worked for Brazil. I don't know that it would work for this country, but it has been a suggested solution. Senator Mattingly, you're fresh in from the fields of campaigning. What is your observation and what would be your solutions to some of the obvious problems that we're confronted with?
Well, first I want to address the other issue.
Okay.
I think, this was tried to address the Senate rules and procedures, which is what I would like to address.
Okay.
And we can address that later. I would say that, if somebody did not like, as Senator Eagleton was saying, that spent 20 years up here, then, it was the same process, but just at a lower level 20 years ago. So I would think that, if people did not like the process, they probably shouldn't participate in it. But I think that, the majority of people do want to participate in the electoral process. And, what the amount of monies are today versus what they were 20 years ago, probably if you put in the fudge factor for inflation, it may be about the same, Tom. I'm not quite certain. But first, I would really like to address, the main issue of what we're talking about, of whether we are in paralysis in the United States Senate. And I think Senator Scott addressed that very eloquently from the standpoint that maybe that was part of the intent of the United States Senate, that maybe it's not supposed to be rolling down the road every day passing tons of legislation and making the life of people in the United States totally miserable all the time. But, I would say that, maybe a lot of people try to criticize the institution, but yet I really believe that it works, that we'll stop for you, Mark.
This is Senator Mark Andrews.
You can see. Good.
Oh, Michael. Hi, Tom. How are you?
But just looking at the institution and seeing how it has worked, I recall that my first 2 years in the United States Senate, I served not only in the Appropriation Committee, which I continued to serve for 6 years, but I also served on the Ethics Committee with Senator Eagleton. And I watched at that time of how the institution really worked. That, in fact, that the Ethics Committee had been working something like 8 months prior to my even coming to the United States Senate, 14 months after that, in reference to a trying to really clean up its own house in reference to Senator Williams' affair. And in fact, the United States Ethics Committee did function, the full United States Senate did function, and it did deliver. And I think that we see also that the authorizing committees in the United States Senate work. That, in fact, we do debate a lot of the great issues of the day. If you just want to look, and I probably won't have them in any particular order when I repeat them from this year, but in fact, we did debate and come to agreement on debating of the contra issue, twice in the United States Senate, once in the House of Representatives. We, in fact, did debate the issue of economic sanctions and passed the legislation in reference to South Africa. Those are major issues. We did, in fact, debate several times and deliver passage both in the House of the United States Senate on textile legislation, which was a major issue of the day. That we did, in fact, debate the judges that came out of the Judiciary Committee and did, in fact, have great debates, I think, on the floor of the United States Senate. So we're talking about aid to the freedom fighters in Nicaragua, South Africa, textile legislation, and several judges. We did, in fact, do a lot of things that I think that the American people really expected the United States Senate to do, and probably that was conceived by the founding fathers for this institution. So a lot of times when, I guess, the biggest critics of the institution are the inmates, which are the 100 in the United States Senate. And we do try to say that we would like to improve it, and some people talk about the quality of life. Well, if the quality of life is so bad here, why are so many people trying to get inside? So I would just say that maybe, in fact, that positive things are happening in the United States Senate. I feel that getting back to what is needed, maybe what it needs to be changed in the United States Senate and probably in our government, has been addressed through time from the conception of our republic. And it was saw fit to make those changes by constitutional amendments. And they have, in fact, come by time during the 200 and some odd years of our institution to make changes when there's been a direct need in something happening that the Senate or the Congress could not really adjust to. That's when constitutional amendments came forth. And Senator Eagleman was exactly right when he said about money. Now, whether it's money for campaigns or whether it's money just to operate this place or whatever it is. But we now have a $1 trillion a year budget in the United States. That's what's stopping up the institution. I think that we do, in fact, debate the great issues of the day. But the problem is we've got a $1 trillion budget. We've got a 1974 Budget Act, Empowerment and Control Act, that was supposed to be put into effect that would, in fact, solve this problem. And it has not solved the problem. So therefore, what is the resolution of that problem? We made a small attempt at it with the Graham-Rudman-Hollings amendment to the 74 Budget Control Act. And that, in fact, is not going to solve the problem. So I would say that maybe what this institution needs to look at, and maybe quit worrying about its own turf problems, but looking at a passage of a constitutional amendment to balance the budget, passage of instituting by statute or constitutional amendment the line item veto for presidential use, whether it's a Democrat or Republican. It wouldn't bother me. But I'm saying this is the problem that we have. I have served 6 years on the Senate Appropriations Committee. We, in fact, jumped through hoop after hoop, not only the Appropriations Committee, but the Budget Committee, the authorizing committees. If we sat here, we debate every issue in the whole total Congress a minimum of 6 times on defense. You will discuss it on defense appropriations, you will discuss it on the Armed Services Committee, and we discuss it on the Budget Committee. So really what we have is the failure of the institution and its ability to really fund the government, Now, years ago, when it was a smaller budget, it could be done. But now, the rules and procedures of the United States Senate do not adapt itself to trying to debate $1 trillion worth of different items throughout this budget process. So I would say that, that the issues or the problems of the day generally cry out for help. And I think the big cry today is for this budget process we have in the United States Congress that obviously does not work. Then anything that's such a failure as the 74 Budget Control Act should not be sacrosanct to change. So I would say that the institution, as I think Senator Scott said, whether it was an effective body, it was probably not meant to be an effective body. But yet, I think that the debates that they have on the floor of the United States Senate, and I would hate to go back and recall all the 6 years of debates that I've heard, and they've been eloquent. And they've been eloquent with my good friend from Missouri and Senator Thurman and many others on the floor of the United States Senate. And we have addressed the problems, I think, many of the problems of the people of our country. But the major problem that has not been addressed is the one of the budget process. And I would say if we can resolve that either by a constitutional amendment to balance the budget with a line item veto or some new idea, then I think that's what we need to look forward to.
Thank you very much. Senator Thurman, as Senator Pro Tem, obviously you're on the floor an awful lot, and your service has been tremendous there. But can you just give us some insights and observations of your own as to the procedures of how the Senate works and how it could be improved?
Well, in my 32 years in the Senate, I'm convinced we've got to make some changes. Now, I believe I talked for the longest time on a filibuster of anyone in the Senate. It's only a question of right of trial by jury. The reason I talked that long is that a statute was up to change the right of trial by jury situation. In 1957, the Constitution provides anyone charged with a crime shall have a trial by jury. Even if you violate a traffic regulation, you can get a trial by the city recorder or a magistrate's case may be, whose jurisdiction is probably $100 or 30 days. But under this particular statute that Lyndon Johnson worked out, it provided that if the punishment is over $300 or over 45 days in jail, you get a trial by jury. Otherwise, you would not. And that completely violates the Constitution, in my judgment. The case later went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld it. That was the Warren Court. If you had the Baker Court, I'm quite sure they would not have upheld it. I think there's that much difference. Now, the question of filibusters, I think should be retained, but I think the rules should be changed.